I've stopped sharing. So yeah, welcome everybody to the week 5 lecture. We'll get through this week 5 lecture. Normal routine, guys. We'll run through for around about an hour. We'll have the 10-minute break, and for you guys putting questions up, we'll deal with that. I'll finish the lecture off, and then after that I will have another short break. It may not be the full 10 minutes that we take. It's a short part of the lecture to go, and then we'll run the workshop. For students, I want to let you know I'm still doing the marking on the class tests at the moment. I was particularly happy on the weekend. Everybody doing the course sat the class test except for one student, and I stopped them from sitting at it because they've only just joined the class in the last week. So you will get a supplementary class test, and I'll give us some detail and feedback on that later in the week to then set that supplementary test for class 1. For everybody else, I should be able to get those results to you for class test 1 by Wednesday. Presently, Dr. Davis and myself are actually putting a session together which has gone out on the course notification that we're running on Thursday, some support for students new to the university to make sure that students know processes, or they can get help, or if they're unsure on their courses, they can ask about that. And for those that haven't been here before this year, last year with the COVID learning, all of our classes effectively got stopped at week 5, right about this time in term 1. And for the rest of the year, we were online with our lecture delivery. Well, there's a number of students, and it includes the postgraduate students as well, that actually have it embedded to the university system. And so for the first year students and now second year students, and for those that started last year, you're the same as a postgraduate cohort. What we've decided to do is to have a session early in the term, this being week 4, so that anybody that's got concerns or questions about their courses can come and ask us and get that support that you might need doing your coursework degree. So if you haven't seen it already, there'll be a notice sent to you. It's happening on Thursday morning up until 1 o'clock, and I think the postgraduate session is between midday and 1 o'clock. So enough said, and we'll get on with tonight's lecture. All right, I'll start sharing again. Okay, so screen content, you should get this in a moment. So for week 4, the lecture material is given to you there. We're looking at factors impacting on project management, planning and estimates, and then how we ascertain the value management process. Okay, so for this material, the week 5 material and the week 7 material, they will be the contents of class test number 2. And I'll have more to say in that in the workshop as we progress. But I want to get that other set of lecture materials up for week 5 and week 7 this week, so that people can do that study and start their learning at an earlier time. All right, so in dealing with this detail, when we're preparing estimates, it's really important that we get a good understanding of what the project's going to cost at the outset. The reason for this is that we need to ascertain whether there's the money available and the resources available to do the project. If we can get preliminary estimates out in the first instance, what's going to happen is you'll get either the go-ahead at that stage to price more deeply, and we will then work out very quickly whether there's enough financing for the project to commence. And if the project can't be properly commenced with that financing, then it's necessary that the project be stopped and we don't waste one another's time and expense in doing a set of estimates that actually aren't going to lead anywhere. So for engineering and construction projects in general, accurate and early cost estimates are really important because they enable the client to make decisions concerning the development of strategies. It allows the client to screen the potentials for projects and then to be able to commit the resources, which includes the money and the financing, to develop that project further. Second reason why it's needed is it provides a behind the camera here, so I'll just have a look over it. It provides the contractor with key information to formulate the execution strategies for the work and the basis behind how we would price the project and do the project in its construction processes. Early estimates serve as a very good baseline for identifying changes from design to construction, as well as comparing the final cost to the early cost estimates. Okay, so in that first instance, we can get a ballpark figure for the work of the early estimate. It either indicates to the client that they're willing to go ahead with it, and then we've got some basis of how that is going to be compared to work out where the value is in the project. Okay, if we have inaccurate early estimates, it can lead to wasted resources, and in terms of the potential for the project, it lowers the opportunities and the returns for that project in terms of how that work would be scoped. So there's some really important concepts in how that goes together. The person who would be doing this work in most instances would be an estimator. Now, it could be a construction estimator, or it could be an engineering estimator, or depending on the nature of the work with the various specialisations that you're dealing with, there could be estimators with particular project flair for special types of projects. So that estimator, I don't care where they come from, have to have a detailed knowledge of the work of the program that would need to be done, and they can come from a number of different backgrounds. It could be engineering, it could be building, or it could be other specialised areas of work. So the estimator has to have the skill, knowledge and experience to competently manage the estimation process. The skill gives them the ability to actually do the work. The knowledge, okay, is how the several parts fit together, and the experience is the know-how and having dealt with these types of things before to know what can go wrong and what the impacts of elements of work going wrong and how you compensate for that. Okay, the tools that will be used in preparing the work outputs are important, but they can't replace the necessary judgment and experience that a person needs to fulfill that role. Okay, so without the experience, okay, we're not going to have good understanding of the total project. Okay, in terms of the estimator skills, the skills are learned through the classroom and teachings and learnings. They're done by training programs, and the knowledge is gained through a wide range of experience. One of the things that I have said in the past is that the process that you come up with to develop a job and price a job and perhaps win the job, those techniques and processes, unless you can put them down under patent, you can expect that you will only have a one-job experience above the rest of the industry, because there's a large amount of copying that goes on in the industry, and many things aren't able to be patented very easily. So as a consequence of that, what we'll find is the person that comes up with a brainstorming idea of how to do something different and gets the advantage for the project that they win, okay, you're only that job ahead of the rest of the industry, because they will be looking to see how you're doing that work with the skills and experience that you'll get. And one of the things that may happen in industry is, as that job finishes up, or there are other jobs that are quoted and won by other contracting agencies, they may well come to you as being the experienced person and offer you more money to leave the work that you're doing and commence work on their new project with all of that knowledge that you've got. Okay, so I have no doubt that that will happen to some of you as you enter industry in the future. You'll get people from other agencies and other organisations recognising the work that you're doing is a good standard, and you'll get the opportunity to join other organisations. Word of warning on it, if it's a really specialised area of skill, okay, you might think twice before changing, because what will happen is you will probably not be liked by the organisation you leave, and the organisations you go to and join, there may not be many other competitors in the industry for that specialised area of work. So what it would mean is you've burnt the bridges from the organisations you've left, but you have no real reason to leave the organisation if they're looking after you well. Okay, so it's a vexed question as to whether you leave the organisation for a very specialised knowledge to go and work for another, if there aren't a lot of opportunities in the industry for those skills to be used across the industry. Okay, the next detail on the slide, the focused effort in the preparation of good estimates is drawn from cost information, preparing accurate quantity takeoffs, adjusting costs for time, size and location, and creating the estimating tools. So one of the things that we'll cover with this in future weeks is that if you were good at building a specific project in one locality, is could you build that specific project in another locality? The answer is yes, but would you win the work? And the reason why I'm stating this is that how do you adopt the costs and the pricing schedules in one locality, then use it in another locality? So for instance, if you were building, I'll just say roadways here in Sydney, okay, and you wanted to build roadways in Melbourne or in Darwin, could you go away and do that work? Of course you could. You would adopt and work with the local materials. But the problem is would you win the work? Because there may be a whole other cost structure in terms of the pricing of materials to get to that locality that you may not be fully aware of. And in Australia, we actually have costings done all the way around the country with different materials and different labour sources, so that we can get a comparative difference between localities of what the pricing estimates should be in. So you might find, for instance, if we have a base rate, which we'll call 100 units in Sydney, okay, to do the work at Newcastle, which is 2 hours away from Sydney, it might be 105. So in other words, it's 5% more expensive to do the work up there than in Sydney. Or you go to Brisbane, it might be 95, so it's 5% less. Okay, so there are areas there where we can get the changes in the cost estimates between localities for the pricing of materials, for the pricing of equipment, and the pricing of labour. And that is how you would go from location to location, knowing that you're actually focused and you're in a position where you can put in a competitive bid in another locality. Okay, so it still won't give you all of the answers, but it will give you a fair bit of understanding of how the industry operates in different localities. I expect that's much the same in other parts of the world. And what you would have to do is also have to adapt to the local custom of the area in the construction processes that you're doing. So for many students here doing this course that are either studying overseas or are from overseas, one of the things that you would have the advantage of is if there was an Australian construction company working, or an Australian manufacturing organisation working in an overseas country which you're familiar with, okay, you have one of the best opportunities to actually join those organisations. You would be recognised with your engineering degree from Australia, so you've born up with the understanding of Australian engineering. Okay, you would have a great idea of the construction processes that the organisation would be doing and how they would go about that with using Australian techniques and standards and processes that you could readily look up here in this country. But then when you get to the country that you're familiar with and where they're working, what do you have to offer? Firstly, you have a really good understanding of the country, its culture and its custom, okay, which the Australian company will be hiring locals to find out about a lot of that detail. You have the crossover capabilities to work within Australian design systems and standards in a foreign country, so you'll know how those standards, or it won't take you long to understand how those standards differ and work together. And then the other thing that you've got is you're probably bilingual in the sense that you've got your native tongue and understanding the customs and how the country economically operates and the communication modes over there. And then you've got the English as well to deal with the Australian company and how they adopt and work within that local environment. So for many of you overseas, you have the ability to work with first world nations, which I will call mostly English speaking, who would be working in overseas environments which you will have the skills and knowledge to be able to be competitive within. So be aware of that. People like myself who have grown up in an English-only speaking country, I lack that issue. It limits where I can work effectively around the world without having other translations. But for many of you in the 21st century, as you progress, you'll find that you'll be working in different localities around the world in your working career, and you'll be adapting and dealing with multi-cultures across a number of different countries, I really expect. Okay, so last point here is about preparation of good estimates. You'll be adjusting those costs for the time. I'll say this, in many cases there we would form an estimate today on today's prices. The tenders go in, they'll either have rise and fall clauses subjected to them, but most often as not, they'll also have a time limitation where that estimate and that tender will be good for. If there's no action by the time expires, then whoever submitted that estimate would have the right to say that we want the ability to reprice the work because it's gone too long a time that the estimate may not be accurate. Okay, yeah, and as I said, we can adjust for size and we can adjust for localities in preparing those estimates and using the estimating tools in different localities around the country, or for that matter, in other countries. Okay, automating the estimating process. Okay, there's an increasing demand within the industry to have automated estimating processes. And that's because we've got many calculations to perform. The other thing is we actually want the estimating process to be a bit bulletproof, that we don't hang the estimating process on to one or two people. A good company manager that would be looking after the estimating process would embed the process and train the people. And as they're training the people with the skills and the differences between the people, they would be extracting more information from the people contributing and boosting up the estimating process within the organisation. And for instance, a person might leave, or worse still, they may die in their job and they're no longer able to serve. What we would want is some robustness to the estimating process, that others can pick that process up and still run with it. So a good estimator, along with a good construction manager in the organisation, would actually be putting an estimating process together that both trains and is current and is robust enough that it can deal with changes of personnel as they leave the organisation or as new ones come in that can pick this up. Okay. Yes, there will be an experience issue with it, but what I'm saying there is think very wisely about how you put this together. The use of spreadsheets and commercial proprietary software is part of that hardware solution in automating the process. The key part is that as you're doing estimates, what you will find is you'll do the estimates and you'll actually have real construction data for projects that you're running with. It's really important for the construction data that's coming in that we can update our estimating process with actual hard evidence of that performance of the organisation in what it does and what it does well and poorly. Because if we don't adjust our processes in the estimation, we'll get problems in terms of estimating profitability for future projects that are coming up. Okay, so being able to update estimating processes during construction is equally as important in putting the estimation system together in the first instance. Okay, I've said on the next dot point is that the selection of key personnel who are knowledgeable on the materials, the methods of construction, and have the common sense, practicum, and good judgment are a large part of the process. What tends to happen with organisations is they will drift in the projects that they will do. So, for instance, an organisation that might be doing road construction will be good at doing estimations on excavation. They will know equipment for that purpose. They'll know probably some details about how to combine materials in a stabilisation process together. Okay, and whilst they're good at road construction, who's to say that they still wouldn't be good at doing excavation for, say, mining operations? Okay, they may not have all the construction equipment to do that or work at the scale of operation, but they would have all the professional judgment capacities to do much of that work. If they've been involved with the excavation of rock in road projects and through cuttings, okay, they'll have the capacity to do that as a mining operation, blasting and other things. So organisations can refunction just because of the skill sets that they have and the personnel that are involved with it. Yes, they may lack the construction equipment to do that, but in the meantime, they may be able to partner with other organisations, or they may be able to negotiate with the client on who owns the construction equipment, and maybe the client owns the construction equipment, and then they can partake in that process because of their experience in other things. So be aware that organisations won't always do what they do today. They will evolve and change, and as they change, so will the personnel, so will the experiences, and I expect so will the construction equipment that they use and process. Okay, that doesn't deal with changes of market, because there may be parts of the market that actually dry up, and it forces an organisation to change focus with what they do as their principal business. Okay, last point on the slide, the accuracy of automated estimate procedures will always be limited on the quality of the input data, and an experienced estimator will have to gauge the reliability of the spreadsheet outputs, okay, as to their accuracy or otherwise. Quite often, you would bring in a project manager to be engaged with an estimate, particularly if the project manager, if they win the work, is to do the project. Reason for that is the project manager will have an insight in dealing with the project estimator, how that work has come together, and they will know understandings in terms of the critical path network and the pinch points in the program, where they have to put a lot of concentration of effort in to actually get the project through that pinch point, or with a very technical aspect of work, how they would do that work and gauge that it's being done properly to eliminate compounding problems with rework, or maybe upset to the program because they've actually done things wrong. All right, with the experienced estimator, I mentioned before about the estimator is reliant upon good data being in their data banks. Part of that data bank is the information coming back from existing construction sites and the updating of the estimating materials for what that organisation can do. So the estimator works on both ends of the work. They'll be doing the costing for future work, but they will also be downloading and processing the data for projects that are underway. Okay, because with that they will get a very good understanding of where the profitability is in any particular project, and the areas where they've got strengths and the areas where they need to have specialist subcontractors to do the work, because that is not what the organisation does best. Okay, let's get to the detail of classifying early estimates. Okay, they're performed through a project's development. Okay, there's an initial estimate formed when a client calls for project variability, and future estimates are compared to those early cost estimates. So in the first instance, a client will ask you for a particular job. You'll go away and price that work, and you'll give them their early estimate. We talked about in previous lectures wants and needs. Okay, and for you as the project estimator, you're trying to develop all the wants that. You're trying to develop all the needs that the client has, but the client will always ask you to add extra stuff for what they particularly want to have over and above that initial need. Okay, these are the things that you're going to perform as functional estimates as that project progresses over time. Okay, so when they come about, they've got to be communicated back to the client to make sure that the client's one, happy with what is being done with those additional parts of the project, and secondly, you need the feedback as to whether they can afford to do that. Okay, so those are both frank and fearless discussions that have to be understood, and over time you'll get an understanding with the client of what extra capacity they have to pay for additional work over and above what you first priced, which is their original needs. Okay. As we're doing re-estimating, what we're going to do is we're going to have to do some additional changes to the project. There's going to be some preliminary engineering, there's going to be some detailed engineering, and then if the project goes ahead, there's going to have to be a procurement issue understood. So we actually have to buy parts and processes for this work. And then we also have to think through the construction processes and how that comes together and functionally works. Okay. Prior to having the ability to do 3D CAD drawings, there was many hours spent by many organisations looking at their 2D drawings to make sure with the surfaces going into buildings that we actually had clearances, the doorways opened the right way, that we had headroom, and we had all the dimensional stability that we actually need for that work. With the 3D CAD operations today, effectively you can push the buttons on that for particular parts of the project, and it will bring up the areas of conflict in the design or in the detailing that have to be sorted out. Okay, but in my time, and we're going back no less than probably 10 years ago, all of this stuff had to be physically and manually checked, and it took a lot of people, or a number of people, a lot of time to do that, to deconflict, to make sure that we never had openings that were too small, that we had good development, that our doorways would open okay and they open the right direction, lots of things like that. Okay, almost invariably, whilst future estimates are expected to agree with the early estimates, the final project costs exceed those initial estimates. Okay? So unless all the design detailing was done up front and the client had worked with the designer in the first instance and then agreed on what was going to be done, the initial estimate and the final project costs will never ever match up, and the final project costs will always exceed the initial estimates from what my experience has seen. Okay. Now, interestingly enough, there are no industry standards defining estimates. Okay, there are packages that come out, but they're able to be changed, and quite clearly, how each one of you went away and did a set of estimates, and how I went away and did a set of estimates would vary. And it varies because of our experience. It varies with our functional understanding of the project, and it varies because of the tools that we would use for defining those estimates. Okay. But in the case of an early estimate, it's defined as an estimate that's been prepared after the initial business study has been done. It's been reviewed prior to the completion of the detailed design. Okay, so what that would mean is that if I knew that the costing of a project, and I had an overall dimension of the project and its spans, we knew that we were going to build it out of reinforced concrete. If I had a structural estimator in there, they would put a preliminary estimate on the size of the beams and the columns and the loadings that would go onto that structure, and they would come up with a ballpark figure as to the dimensions of the beams. They would be able to price that. They would know the percentage of steel going into the job, so they could price that. Given the size of the construction operations, the construction estimator would be able to price that construction project. Okay, so we are dealing there with an early estimate, so it's we're dealing that after the business case, but we haven't done the detailed design as the final cost estimate for that work. So that's the sort of things that we would be dealing with, and they're the sort of things that would be taken to a client. And if you came up with that preliminary estimate and you said to the client, it's going to cost you $5.6 million to build that structure as you've proposed, the client would say to you, oh, that's either a bit expensive, and that's sending a signal to you that they actually haven't got the money secured to do that work, or they give you the other detail, okay, yep, we can handle that. What other things could we put into the project at this stage, which is above their initial needs, but you'll start to get other things which will include their wants as part of that early estimate. Okay, so you can see the importance I'm driving at there. Okay, two examples of cost estimate classifications are detailed by the Association for Advancement of Cost Engineering International and the Concrete Industry Institute as preliminary organisations that could pull this detail together. All right, so what sort of accuracies do we have in the planning and the estimating roles for this? So we have from the AACE, the International Cost Estimation Classifications. This was given in the Overland reference. Class 5, which is where we've got the concept screening. Okay, we've got level definition of the project, which is pretty scoped well. Okay, and the expected accuracy on that one is pretty wide. Okay, it's going to be because of, sorry, in terms of the level of project definition, we haven't got a lot there, so it's right at the preliminary stage. We're doing a concept screening for this, so we might be as accurate as minus 50% with our estimate, okay, to being 100% over and above that estimate. Okay, so as we get into the study or the feasibility of the work, we might be at the level of definition of maybe out to 5% accuracy for the whole thing. And you can see there the estimate planning comes down quite substantially. We might be minus 30% below the estimate, but we've cut the accuracy to being only 50% above the expected price that the job might have. Okay. Class 3. Okay, so we do a lot more design, a lot more functionality on the project itself. So we might be up to 40% capability on the design of the project. Okay, we're starting to get to doing the budget, the authorisations, and the control of that project. And again, the expected accuracy of the pricing is being minimised all the way through to somewhere -20 through to +30%. Okay, we then get to the stage of we've got enough detail to bid or tender the work. Okay, we'll be able to control it. So we would have somewhere between 70 and 30% of the work all finalised, so that it can be let to tender, and our pricing there will vary from -15 to +20%. So as we do more and more project definition, you can see that the expected range in the pricing will come down. If you let the project out too early, and maybe you released it at, say, class 3, you can see here we're going to get a really wild set of pricing schedules come in, and we may well find there that some pricing for the project is twice that from others. Okay? So it makes it really hard to estimate. But the more work that we do, the better the control that we get. So in a design and construct project, where we're allowing a contractor to both design and construct the work, we would have a scenario where we're likely to get a lot closer between the bids with the organisations. And as a consequence, we will find those thresholds, the upper and lower thresholds, much better defined. Okay, so when we're getting to the stage there that we're dealing with the project in total, okay, and we get somewhere between 50 and 100% of the estimate or the project definition being defined, what we will get is pricing within -10 to +15% of the total price of the job. So, yeah, there's many different ways that preliminary estimates can be brought forward, but as you'll see there, depending on what we're aiming to do, we may be finding in the first instance here to work out whether a client has got enough money or resources to do the job. We'll be dealing with class 5, class 4, and maybe asking the client, have they got the sort of resources to build the structure? And we haven't invested a lot of time into the project at that stage. What we're after is a nay or yay on that. And as we progress further, we're asking a question for the yes or no on the progress. And but we don't want to be doing this detail knowing that the client hasn't got the resources to do the project in the first instance. Okay, so on this table here, what we've got is the orders of magnitude, factored estimate and a controlled estimate. Okay, on those percentages. Okay, so 30 to 50% would be a feasibility study of the cost and capacity. Okay, if we're factoring the estimate, we're down 25 to -25 to +30%. Okay, we're going to be looking at the major equipment that we'll be doing that job for and the factors that will be applied for those costs. Okay, if we do the control estimate, we're looking at the detail and drawings for the mechanical, the electrical, the civil type work that would be doing that. And you can see there we're going to be within plus or minus 10 to 15% of that work. And once we've got detailed drawings, okay, our estimates are going to be defined as being less than 10% on the total price. So important how we're going to go about our work here and how we're going to do that pricing and what we actually need for key considerations in the progress of that contract. Okay, I've now put down the estimating work process. So if we're dealing with the preliminary factors. Okay, we want standardisation of the cost estimate preparation. So this is how we price our work. Are we doing it for unit rates, such as scheduled rates, and how we're likely to deal with that? What does the client want? How do we prepare that? So we've got to get alignment with how we put our estimate together that can be communicated well with the client. Okay, the alignment of the objectives between the customer and the team. So the team of estimators doing the work and the construction, and with our customer, we want to make sure that we're actually building the right building in the right place with the right resources within it. Okay. Or it could be a road, or it could be any other civil engineering structure, but we're effectively agreeing on what we want as the output from this project. Okay, we're going to select our estimate methodology of how we go about doing the pricing for it. We've got to collect the project data. Now, this could be work that we've done previously, or we may have people that we've recruited to the organisation have particular knowledge about the project and how to derive that data, or we're going to be reliant on their experience. And likewise, we would have confirmation of historical information that we might have existing in our organisation, because we've done this type of work before, but we have to upgrade it to make sure that it's current. So, for instance, if you had been doing blasting operations 10 years ago on a particular hardness of basalt material in the quarry operations, and we now have to remove basalt today, 10 years later, okay, how good is that historical cost information? How would we upgrade our costing information on removal of basalt by blasting to bring it up to speed for today's operations? And we might have that. We may not have been blasting basalt in recent years, but we've been blasting other materials, and we have a good understanding of the amount of material that we've used for that new rock. We have a good idea of the costs of how that would go together, and then we can go to that historical information and work out how much blasting powders and resources we need for that change of rock type. Okay, so that's how that would come about. So you're matching your existing information with historical data to actually bring that to current project data information that you would use. Okay, point 5 is organising the estimate into the desired format. So who are we communicating this with, and how are we communicating the outcomes of that with the client? So you won't show them all your estimate information, but the project manager dealing with the client will need some forms of data of how they're going to present that and to who they're going to deal with. So it may be to subcontractors, it may be to the client, it may be to their own personnel, okay? And for the project manager and maybe some of the subordinate managers, they may need a detailed costing of that estimate, so that as the project kicks off, they know where the, as I say, the pinch points and where the areas are in that project where good profitability can be drawn, and where those areas that they need to scrutinise very closely are for the purposes of running the project successfully. Okay, documentation and communication of the estimate basis, accuracy, and whatever else. Like all project work that you do and all design work that you do, there will be a date and a version. Okay, and that date and version is particularly important as you are putting these estimates together. And if you've put data in there that you have estimated, it's important that to be estimated, and you might have some notes in there that it needs to be checked, okay, or it needs to be vetted and reviewed by somebody with more experience before the communication of those processes goes outside of the estimation team. Okay, so this documentation, communication, and knowing where the errors and irregularities are in how that estimate's gone together, at whatever stage that takes, needs to be very well understood. Okay, review and checking of the estimate. that probably goes without saying, because as we get more information about the design and we get more understanding of what the client wants in the project, it will be subject that the estimate has to be reviewed, and it has to be have completed checks and balances taken on it to include that new information and data. Okay, feedback from project implementation. So this is the last step, and this is when the project is in operation. Effectively, what's going to happen is we may have data from existing projects which we bring into our estimation process, and we register that data on the estimate program. Likewise, this data could come back many years or many months later, because the only feedback that we've got of the initial estimates when we've stood and undertaken to do new work only comes back from the project as it's being implemented. Okay, so that feedback will come from a number of sources. We've gone out to do a different style of work that we've not done before. We're going to only get that project information back from new work that we do. All right, schematically, you guys can see what's happening here. So the first part of the process is an alignment, and the alignment is with the client and the organisation to define the scope of works. Okay, there'll be a lot of discussion between the client and the organisation in the first instance to get this underway. Okay, we'll prepare an estimate for this work. Okay, once we get the estimate together and the process continues to go, what we'll do there is document the estimate, and we'll review the estimate. So on that review, what will happen is there'll be a reality check, okay, and it's based on the internal review of the organisation, okay, and if it seems satisfactory and it seems great, we'll continue on. If it stands out that it's not in the same form of other estimates, or it's different, we'll actually do this iteration again until we get it right. Okay. You can see here that do we have to adjust the estimate? Okay, so the work that we've done compared to other projects of similar projects, is this estimate high or low compared to other projects that you might know of? They may not be work that you've done, but they may be work that other people have done, and you can get an estimate of how that project compares. If the answer says yes, that we have to adjust and review the estimate, okay, so we're now doing an external review based on other projects that have been done, and we would reprice that. And until such stage that we say that we're happy with that adjusted estimate, we can't go forward. Okay, we adjust the estimate on the assumption here that we win work. We then get into the project execution phase, which leads to the completion phase. So under the project execution phase, what we're going to do is we're going to take data out of this and put this back into our estimating system. So as a continuous learning process, we will actually take that data, compare that to the standards that we're producing, okay? And if those standards are satisfactory, we'll add it to the database, okay? And as a result of that database, we're improving our estimates and our estimate processes further. We then get to the stage there, we get to project completion, okay? And we will either have made a profit or we will have made a loss. Hopefully we will have made a profit, but nevertheless, under any of those outcomes, we need to again work out what we did right and what we did wrong in the job and send that feedback. And in this case here, for the work that we're doing on each part of the project, compared to the initial estimates, we'll send feedback back to the estimator to update the database. Okay, so that's the process for it. And as a consequence of this, this is how you keep your database current. If you've got a current database, okay, when you go to estimate the scope of the work, you can you've got good detail in your database and your estimating procedure to do that work well. Okay, it's just coming up to 5 to 6, or it's just gone past 5 to 6. I might stop for a 10-minute break at this stage, and then we'll do the remaining slides for the next part of the lecture. Okay, if there's any questions, put them on the discussion. So that goes. I was just looking at one of the questions here. Is the slides flipping while Robert's presenting? No, I'm actually moving them up to the screen because I've got an eyeball camera in front of me as I'm looking at you guys. It's right in the middle of the screen. So as you look at me on the screen, I'm actually presenting to you face to face on the camera and reading the slides behind that. So where I can't see it, I just move that up slightly. Okay, so that's how that's come about. Okay, and I see here that one of the students said it's an iterative process. Well done. Okay, I'll leave it at that. Okay, all right, let's have a 10-minute break. I'll stop sharing and I'll turn the screen off. I need a drink of water. You guys probably need a relief in place as well. Get something to eat or drink, and I'll see you at 5 past 6. Okay. So as you see now, I'm looking at the other screen and it's not face onto you guys. Whereas if I do that, I am We'll get underway in about another minute's time, guys. It's just gone 7:04. So on from there. Okay, we'll get underway again. There's only 2 extra questions that have come up on the chat at this stage. First one is, when I check the timetable, I find that there is another class on Saturday from 9:30 a.m. to 12 a.m. It's actually p.m. So what will I do for that? Shall we take part in a collaborative session? Okay, if you have a look closely on the timetable, you'll see those Saturday sessions are only for week 4, week 7. I think it's week 4, week 7, and week 10. Okay, and they're the time that I've allocated for the class test. I put a window there from 9:30 till 12 p.m. But as you found out, I'm generally starting at 10 o'clock, and I will continue that start for the other tests. However, we are short in terms of the delivery hours for this. What I will do is I'm going to make other sessions available throughout the term, particularly after week 5. And the reason for that is you guys will then be starting to put your reflective journal together, and you'll probably want to have online discussion with me, or you'll want time to perhaps come and see me and talk to me on that. So I will be putting up some other alternative times where people can discuss with me their journals and their course program in the second half of the term to get that feedback that you'll need after week 5, once that reflective journal starts to take shape. So it's not as though you need to compete every Saturday. I don't want to be here every Saturday, and I'm sure you don't either. The class test is still scheduled for that time. All right, another buddy question there. When will the class test 1 marks be released? They'll be early this week. I'm expecting at this stage I'll be finished the marking tomorrow, so I should get them out to you on Wednesday. Okay, and I'll deal again with that in the workshop. So to get across that preliminary question now, that's the best I'll give you at this stage. All right, I'll share my screen again with you. Okay, so in a moment that'll pop up for you. Okay, let's have a talk about risk assessment. All right, assessing risk and assigning contingency to the base estimate is one of the most important tasks in preparing early estimates. Okay, and it makes sense. If you think about this, if you're preparing an early estimate, you need to know where the problem areas are in the estimate and how we address the risk matters around that project. Okay, and it's not the sole responsibility of the estimators. Generally with a project, on the premise that the organisation will win the work and do the work, there'll be a project manager assigned to that project. So that project manager and other key people in the organisations will be working with the estimators to put that notation down on the early estimates as to what they have to consider for risk. As the program of that project progresses, so will the detail in the estimate, and so will the detail in the construction process, and the risk factors will come down, and appropriately the estimate can reflect that change in status as the project comes better towards fruition and construction. Okay, and so we might have, for instance, if we go back to that issue of blasting, we may have people that are out the blasting team that actually can provide input for new estimates, and if they've been there a long while and they had done that estimate on the basalt and the blasting of basalt, they will provide key information to the estimators on where the risk areas are in that and where the expenses are in doing that estimation. Risk estimate requires participation by all project stakeholders. Okay, and the 4 points I've got there is the business units are responsible for the project funding and defining the intended purpose that is to take place. Okay, the engineering design, providing the design data and the factors may impact on the job cost. Okay, so you can see there the business unit and the engineering design unit have got to put some details in to mitigate these risk issues. The estimator is responsible for converting all of that information into an appropriate procedure for assessing risk and the assigning of contingency in the estimate itself. Okay, and the estimator's got to be able to communicate all of those issues, the risk, contingency, and the level of accuracy that can be expected in the final estimate of the work. Okay, so there's a lot of feedback that's required for that, and the estimator has got to inform a lot of people on that discussion. And it won't just take place by numbers into a data sheet. There will be some pretty robust discussions by all of those parties in providing the information in the first instance, understanding how those other elements of the business operate in collaboration with one another so that they get the full understanding of what they're assigning the risk to and the contingencies that they have to deal with. Okay, risk analysis. Okay, it's a prerequisite to consigning contingency. So before we can say this is how we're going to manage it, we actually have to understand where the risk parts are and then bring in the processes of how we're actually going to manage it, and plus the contingencies that have got to be considered. Okay, based on acceptable risks and the expected confidence level of those risks, a contingency is established for each given risk. Okay, so the sorts of things that we might have an example on there. If we go back to the blasting operation, one of the issues in blasting is how much explosive material is used. And if we do that, how far the fly rock from that blasting emanates. Okay, quite clearly, if you change the rock and you change the amount of explosive to be used with that, it's going to give you a different fly rock passage and standoff areas. All of those things have to be considered in doing the work and setting up this in the first place. And you can see there that just with that simple example, it's going to need a lot of discussion between operational people. It's going to need discussion with the planning people, and it's going to need discussion with the project manager and how they're going to run that project. Okay, the risk analysis and the amount of contingency help the business unit to determine the economic risk in pursuing the project. So if the risks are too great, okay, the business unit is going to actually call a halt to doing the project. Okay, and for instance, the part of that might be building a dam. Okay, and if we've got to build a dam, we've got to divert the river to build that dam at the time, and we've got a whole heap of meteorological data that says that flooding is imminent in the years ahead that dam's going to be built. Okay, once they go through how to best manage the flooding with it, Okay, and they then look at the and they then determine how often that flooding might occur on its confidence interval. Okay, the risk for it in terms of how that's run may be too great, and the organisation will choose not to actually go ahead with the project or price the project because of that risk analysis. In the meantime, they might be speaking with the client and will say, yes, we can do this work and it's necessary to build that dam. But the problem is if the flooding occurs, this is going to be the setback to the project, and this is going to be the cost of that. And the client, which would, in the case of a dam, which would be a government agency, might be still quite happy to go ahead with that and wear the risk and compensate the contractor if that flooding occurs, so that as the flooding dies down, they can get on with the job and continue on with the work. Okay, but again, there's got to be a lot of discussion across the industry to actually work out who carries the risk. And there's both owners' risks and contractors' risk. I will give you this advice about risk. It's generally handed down to the person who can best manage the risk. Okay, so if it's a construction issue, the construction contractor probably wears the risk with it. But if it's a planning issue on flooding, okay, it's not something that the contractor will have a lot of input or not have a lot of knowledge about. So in terms of how that would go, going back to the dam scenario, the person who could best manage that would probably be the government at the time, using the best flooding analysis work coming through their agency, such as part of the Department of Meteorology and other tools that they would have there, and they define whether the project should go ahead or shouldn't go ahead, and what happens if the flooding does occur on that basis. Okay, a formal risk analysis involves either a Monte Carlo simulation or a statistical analysis using specific risk analysis software packages. Okay, so away that goes. There are some projects where you actually have an absolute deadline. Okay, a good example of that might be the start of the Olympic Games. And in the last Olympic Games, there was a set starting time for that, and no matter what went wrong before that, the Olympic Games were going to open on that scheduled date. Okay, so in terms of the pricing of the work and the detail around that, all of the parties would be working together to make sure that that opened, because it's a must-do event, and the circumstances with that is there would be specific risk contingencies put in for that on the way through in the construction of how they go about speeding up the program to actually meet that contingency date. Right, so on it goes. All right, contingencies. Okay, it's a really necessary part of an estimate. Contingencies are based on the uncertainty in the estimating work, and the sorts of things that need to be considered would include the pricing, okay, how that pricing will change with time through escalation, okay, the schedule, in other words, how long it will take to build, and if we want to shorten that schedule, what the contingency is on the pricing escalation as a result of that. And then there's other things such as omissions and errors in the project and how we deal with the contingency elements of those errors. Okay. So in terms of how that goes, we're starting to think about the practice of including contingency for possible scope expansion, and it's dependent upon the attitude and the culture of the business and how it deals with those changes in the estimation process. I noticed one of the wordings that came up in the chat session at that stage was a student talking about indirect costs. Just let me pull that up. It's probably pertinent if I do it here. And it's a fair enough consideration with that. So, but they still have to be dealt with, okay? Yeah, so they still have to be dealt with. Simplistically, contingency is about the amount of money that should be added to the base estimate in order to predict the total installed cost of the project. Contingency often need to be covered as project unknowns, okay? And because you physically, in some instances, you can't see them happening, you may have some details in your contract writings of how to deal with them as indirect costs under that circumstance, or you may have an unknown. You know that it will actually realise through the project, but when you do the pricing, you recognise that that's got to be priced independently, and you get an agreement with the client that you would do that over and above the initial estimate that's gone in. And that might occur because you don't have enough information to price the work accurately, or the client may be in a situation where they can't give you a definitive outcome that they want the work done, so you both agree to price that if it comes up at a later time. That's the sort of thing that may be given in the contingency, either through indirect costs or be dealt with as a separate element within the scope of the project. Okay, estimate feedback for continuous feedback. Okay, what I mean by that is that as we're pricing a job, our database within the estimating process will change, and what we need is we need to be able to update that detail in real time as we go into construction. So the previous schematic that I showed you on it, I explained that. It's quite straightforward there. Okay, an estimator engaged in the construction phase helps the organisation to update its estimating values. Okay, so likewise, where we have a project manager that might be involved with the estimating phase, it would make good sense to the organisation to actually embed an estimator with a costing process on the job. Okay, because they will get a really good understanding of what's been allowed for in the project and where those changes of update to where the currency of the organisation is in terms of how it's performing its practices. Okay, so they'll get a good understanding of costs and the value that's being offered through their estimating processes. Okay, again, the estimator on the construction site captures those standards, and it includes best practices that can be done. It will also eliminate poor practices, and that is also a better practice taking place. Okay, that feedback from the project completion. Okay, so when we finish the project off, we can divide the total cost of that project any way we want in terms of the overall parts of the building, and we can get really key information for preliminary pricing at future events on that wholesale cost of the project and the types of things that we might be doing. So, for instance, if it was a concrete frame structure and it costs $10 million to build and it was 10 stories, okay, you would get an average there for the size of the building, and the dimensions is that it would be $1 million per floor. Okay. Other things that you might be looking at for the total duration of time is you can actually work out for the whole project the schedule on how that went and how accurate it was, and from that you can get a time estimate for how events have taken to build, and from that you can get a much better costing estimate. So all of these things allow the estimator to track costs and standardise the organisation much better. The final project cost report is extremely valuable for improving future estimates because it provides an overall feedback on the comparison between the initial estimate cost of the project and what the functional costs were to do the job. Okay, so that would make great sense. All right, the value management process. I really like this part of the work, okay, because it doesn't get down to the stage of what it costs you to do. It's about what you are giving for the price that you are doing the job. and value is a perceptible item, and as such, it's not so much what the cost is as how the process is valued. So Connaught and Green define the value management process as a structured approach to defining what value means to a client in meeting the perceived need by establishing clear consensus about the project objectives and how they can be achieved. Okay? So you'll notice there that it's actually client-centric and it's about their perceived need. Okay? Really important point about what value is. Value to you is about, as a contractor, means how can you do that work for the minimised cost or maximise profit. Value to the client is about meeting the project objectives. Okay? So there's a very big difference between the builder and the owner of how value is perceived. Okay, value management is a disciplined approach to approaching the overall project design to ensure that the project meets its objectives and functions in the most economical way. Okay, and that takes place for both the client and the builder, with a contractor doing the work. Okay, it's conducted by a structured workshop facilitated by a professional value manager and involves members of the design team, the client, the project manager, and the quantity surveyor. So as you might be doing an estimate for a building, at some stage there you actually do a value management review of the project. You involve the client, you involve the project manager, and you involve the quantity surveyor. And as a consequence to that, it brings home for everybody what each different perspective involved with that project perceives as where their values are in the project delivery. Okay, it's not designed of appraising the effectiveness of designer. It focuses on the effectiveness of the design outputs. Okay, so it's about functionality. Okay. All right. It's common that the value management process is performed at the preliminary and the preliminary design stages. Okay, so if we spend maybe 0.1 to 0.3 of the construction cost of that project at the output, when we're doing these preliminary and preliminary design stages, what we're likely to do is get significant cost savings in the vicinity of 10% by doing the value management. Okay. So what it does is it releases all the hang-ups that different people have in the process and makes everybody in the process think more clearly on the project of the inputs that are being done there, and what we get is good savings all around for both contractor. It could be time savings, but it could also be monetary in terms of the value that we give to the client. It's structure and procedure. Okay, it's a common approach. We create a work breakdown structure or a value tree analysis in the design problem. We separate the objectives from the sub-objectives and in turn breaking each of these elements into sub-elements. Okay, so a works breakdown structure for explanation for you guys. If we had the building of a multi-storey building, say this building, what we might have in the work breakdown structure is the foundations to start with. Then on top of that, we might, because this is a concrete frame building of the concrete frame. Okay, then we might have the setting of the facade and how we make the building waterproof. And then for the sake of other things, the fit out, the interior fit out. So in the work breakdown structure for that whole program, I've just given you 4 things: foundation, the frame, the facade, and the fit out. They're the key headings in the work breakdown structure for the project. But if I went to, say, the foundations, what I would have in the first instance there would be a breakdown of the sub-objectives, and the sub-objectives with the foundations would be removing of the topsoil, excavation to the design levels, removal of rock, okay, drainage work that has to take place, and so on. And if we were doing the concrete frame structure, the sub-elements within that would be the casting of the ground slabs, okay, the casting of, the formwork involved in putting columns up, okay, the reinforcement that would go into those, the casting of the concrete into the columns, okay, the formwork and the false work that has to go up to then build the first floor, okay, and its reinforcement, and so on. You work through the structure. Fitting of the facade would be manufacturing of the facade elements, bringing them to site, okay, then erecting them, maybe then erecting windows, and maybe the waterproofing elements that have got to take place in that process. And then the fit out is how we do the interior walls, doors, fit out of lifts, and so on. Okay, so work breakdown structures, breaking down into key elements and then the sub-elements within those. Okay, so each of the components is assessed by weighting a consensus of the parties contributing. So if we had the client contributing, or we had the contractor contributing, or we had specialist estimators and maybe subcontractors, they would put a weighting of the importance of each of those breakdown structures of where the most important parts of the building are. And clearly you can only go to 100%, but they would break down on where the majority of the savings in the most important parts of the building are. And so you can start to get a consensus across all of the people involved with the project, which are the critical elements of work. And what they do in determining those weightings, they ask, what does it do? What will it cost? What else would work? And what does that cost? So for instance, if we were looking at the civil engineering building, which I said to you is a concrete frame structure, one of the things that might come up is, instead of erecting a concrete frame structure, could we actually erect this as a steel frame structure? Okay, and so they would work that out and do a comparison against that. And one of the things that would come in a steel frame structure, the materials might cost a little bit more, but because we can prefabricate it and we can erect it much more quickly, we may get a construction cost savings in that would offset the cost of the time to build the concrete frame structure. Okay? So they're the sorts of things that would come in where the whole of the process is scrutinised, and it's scrutinised by different people to then drive that value management process. So the effectiveness of the design options is best achieved using design evolution matrix, which comprises of criteria, weightings, a performance scale, okay, and then the performance index. Okay? And what we're dealing with these is the criteria is how we actually measure the elements. It may be by dollars, it could be by cubic meters, it could also be time, okay? And between the parties, they come up with different relative ratings, different ratings or weightings to the importance of that criteria. Okay, we then have to work out how we're going to measure the performance, and we then have to have a benchmark that we compare that to, and then the performance index is it determines that performance. All right, so that's the overall basis of doing a value analysis. We're going to cover this a bit further in future weeks with more exemplars. So I'll address that as we progress. Now we're just coming up to halfway through the second hour. I think what I'll do is I'll have a 5-minute break and then come back and I'll get into the workshop. And I'm expecting tonight that probably between 8 and 8:15 we'll finish the workshop off, so you guys will get an early mark, which will allow you to get on with other submissions that I know you have to do this week for other courses. And yeah, so I will deal, actually I'll deal with the questions now and then we'll have the break. So, all right. Next question that's come up, so I'll stop sharing. Okay, so the next question that's come up guys, is costs of insurance products for risk mitigation included in the estimates? Okay, good question. In terms of insurance, one of the things that I will say to you about insurance is actually not well understood in the industry. If you're a contractor and your job is erecting structures or erecting dams, for the work that you are doing, you cannot get insurance for the work that you do, because that's your primary area of work. However, for the employees that are working in the organisation, what you can get in insurance is insurance against genuine mistakes that may occur. Okay, so part of the way that insurance work goes is that it depends on what the risk is as part of that. But if you're looking for insurance as your risk mitigation, okay, I think you're right at the you're at the wrong end of the detail in the estimate. The risk mitigation is how you're actually going to stop that from occurring. If your only option is insurance, okay, and remembering the point that I've said there, that whatever your primary operation is, the industry expects you to be able to perform that work, you need to look at other ways of controlling the mitigation. If we go to the issue of building a dam and your job is being a dam builder, okay, and the estimate of the flooding coming through on that, okay, the insurance companies won't look at you. So the only way you'll get the mitigation against flooding is if the government of the day is prepared to agree to the terms that you are doing. If the flooding occurs, they wear the costs of the reconstruction, so that you can then re-establish your processes. Now, if a flood is imminent coming through that waterway when you're constructing there, you will have to have a contingency plan in place, and this is part of your risk mitigation, to minimise the damage to the structure and to minimise the damage to your men, well, I won't say men, to your work crew and the equipment that you are using. Okay, so that's what I'm dealing about with the mitigation and the risk management processes for that, to eliminate death and injury on site and to eliminate the damage done to the construction equipment being used. So if we're successful in getting all our temporary equipment out of the project that is not supporting concrete structures, for instance, if it was a concrete dam, that would work okay. But as the flood came through and those parts of construction that are being built and underway that are damaged, okay, we would have our negotiation with the client that we will re-establish ourselves on site. Okay, we'll have to probably have some dig out and remove mud and other things that have come through, and then after that, re-establish the construction operations once that cleanup has taken place. That would be the way that you would plan your mitigation. Dealing with insurance costs is a foolhardy way of dealing with the industry. You might get away with it the first time, you'll never get away with it the second time after, okay? And if you get away with it the first time, you'll be really struggling to find an organisation that will actually insure you in the second round because you're not being professional. Okay, so this comment may come on about the cost of insurance. Sure, but that would be part of the indirect cost of the construction management. Okay, so I'll leave it for what I've said already about insurance. It's the last threshold that you use, and it creates complications if it goes ahead, and you'll have a lot of litigation about what the expectancies were of the contractor in that work. What types of cover sheet should we use for our dot point brief? Okay, in terms of the cover sheet, I'm quite happy for you to just put a single page on that. Okay, put your name, put the dot point brief about what it is and the organisation and the date that you have submitted it. Okay, it needs no other work than that. With the dot point brief that you are doing, because you are giving me a reference list that I can go through if I need to. I'm sure that how you've constructed your dot point brief will not align with anybody else's, and I've said there that I'm not going to put that through a Turnitin assessment, having a rethink on that, and that's up on the Moodle at this point. So I don't need a university cover sheet. Just put your name and your detail on it. I will know you've done the work. If I've got any questions, by the time I question you over that work, you'll be able to give me those answers straightforwardly. So I'm not expecting any problems there. So yeah, don't worry about using the university cover sheets. Okay, so way that goes. Okay, what if? Okay, so the next question there is what if the job advertisements have changed over the course? Okay, so what if job advertisements have changed over the course of the assignment? Okay, I don't actually know what you mean by job advertisements. It may be because the organisation's renamed. Okay, you might put that in, and you might put an exemplar if the job has changed in advertisements and I don't know what you've written, and if it's pertinent to your dot point brief, you're saying that preparation of this dot point brief, as from such and such a date, it is known that the advertisements have changed. Okay, so the next detail that's come in there, it's about the current vacancies. So the question is about what are the current vacancies and they've changed. Okay, all you can put is a picture in time. So you can say that as at today's date, for instance, as of the 8th of March, the current job vacancies were this, 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 and this. That will get around your problem, and I'm quite happy with that. Okay. And you might say for the time that you've been studying your organisation that they tend to update their job vacancies weekly, fortnightly, or they may have updated a set of job vacancies because they've won a new project, which is such and such a project. Excuse me, I've got the hiccups. Yeah, so that should work quite okay. All right, I've answered all of those details now. Let's have a 5-minute break and we'll get back to the workshop thereafter. Okay. All right, I'll stop sharing. Oh, sorry, I'm already there. So I'll turn the camera off and the microphone off, and okay, if I can have everybody back here at around about 7:47 with the 5 minutes. Thanks, guys. Okay, we're just getting back on time. A few seconds early at the moment. We'll get underway in a moment. Okay, with the workshop for this week, I've given you 2 readings within the Moodle. The Infrastructure New South Wales Treasury 2016. It's the Infrastructure Investor Assurance Framework. And you can pull that up yourselves to have a look at it. I accessed it about 2 years ago. It may be updated from now, but and then there's the New South Wales Treasury Gateway Review System, again, and the Queensland Department of Housing and Public Works, and how they deal with the value management process. So the questions that I've got there, these resources are reference documents about how value management within the New South Wales and Queensland government is undertaken. And through your reflective journal, you can include comments either about the similarities or the differences. You haven't got to write about both, but I want you to have an understanding of how this value management process goes together by the Treasuries of New South Wales and Queensland Department of Public Works. And likewise, if there's differences, you can comment on those. Okay? So in either case, you are reading it and you have the juxtaposition to write about in doing the entries on that reflective journal for this week. Okay, the individual assignment, your dot point brief is due later this week. I've opened up the portal today. One of the students put on the discussion board that I had opened it up. I'd actually opened the reflective journal. What I had done is I edited the last version of the reflective journal, and I forgot that I had a marking template inside that. So I've opened up a new portal. You guys can all load your individual assignments onto that portal from any time after now, as it is. Okay, you should be at a stage with your reflective journal, should be starting to take shape, and you're refining it as you progressively write your elements of work up. I know that some of you probably haven't started yet and you're waiting to week 6. Okay. I've given you exemplars which you can see for that, and please peruse those and look at smart ways that you can include the information without lots of writing. They could be schematics, they could be graphs, they could be tables. There's a few different ways that you can do that, which you'll see in those other elements that I've put in from other students. Okay, if you haven't started your journal, so I've got this for your consideration. Don't continue on this same trajectory. Okay, you will not be able to complete your work by the submission date to a satisfactory standard. And I've given you an outline of how you can get 70%. Okay, the issue about getting more than 70% is not about writing more. It's about how you use the smarts of your learning. And I'll see this through your journal. I'll take that into consideration, the marking of how you've improved your journal writings. Okay, so it's about self-reflection and being honest with what you're doing. The only 2 people that are going to read it is you and I, unless you show it to somebody else. And I will make some time available after week 5 for students to contact me directly, either with direct meetings with me in a room in the Civil Engineering building, or directly online if you're overseas or you want to deal with that discussion online, so that you can ask me any questions on a one-on-one type session. Okay. Class test 1, I've said time will be set aside to discuss class test 1 within the workshop tonight. And when I wrote this on, I think I did this on Sunday before I uploaded it, the marking was going well. It was Saturday actually. The marking was going well, but As I've said to you this week, I'll get that to you by Wednesday. It's my expectancy for that. So I've got a bit of marking to do tonight, tomorrow, and then compile all the marks and upload them. You'll be able to see on the Moodle where the marks are. You check that in the left-hand margin for new students here. You'll see in the margin where you can check your results for the course. Okay, preparing for class test number 2. It's important that I state this. The lecture notes, workshops and readings for weeks 5 and 7 will be available. I'm going to make those available this week so that over the week 6 break you can be preparing for the next class test. I will tell you the format for class test 2 next week. I've not said it yet, but I need to come back to you on that in terms of how that goes. Not all the tests will involve all handwriting. I'll have some tests that have got some online components to it and some written descriptive details. So your next test, don't expect it will all be written online. Okay, it won't be. So how that goes. All right, that completes the workshop material. I now want to go through class test number 1 for you. So I've got that detail. I'll bring that out, and what I have done, probably the best way to do this is upsize this further for you. Okay, so these are the solutions that I've put. They won't exactly align with your solutions, but I'll tell you how I'm doing the marking for them. Okay, so you got the cover page to this, and you got that in advance, so that was all good. Okay, and you had the marking template for that. Okay, the detail in red are the way that I'm choosing to do the marking. I haven't provided all the examples for you, but I've given you the areas in the notes where you should have been looking to get the guidance for this. So for question 1, organisation change over time, and provide 5 examples which give credible reasons to justify the quotation. Okay, and your examples should encapture that the world around the organisation has changed and it will continue to do so. So you might give an example of that. One of those right at the minute is probably the pandemic. Okay, so all the organisations around the world have had to adjust pretty violently over the last 12 months because of that pandemic. Okay, we have new societal, global, economic, global and technology norms that need to be doing that. And so what you should do is you should have an example of perhaps some of these elements as part of your answer. You've got 1 mark for each. Okay, if you fail to provide the example that gave me these types of details, you'll get half a mark for each one of those. But I wanted you to think carefully of specific examples that would go down on that as your answers for it. Okay, in question 2, on the answer template you had the table and you had to put in the words effectiveness and efficiency into the table for those responses. A, B, C and E were all examples of effectiveness, and efficiency was what was being reported in D. All right. Okay, so the question is the completion of the work that is compliant with the job specification. Okay. Okay, it is not about efficiency, it's about efficiency relates to time. The completion of the work being about the specification means it's about not having to do and rework. Okay, so that becomes the effectiveness of the work being done, that it's actually done properly. So that's why I classified it as effectiveness. All right, question 3 about manipulation and co-optation and coercion. Explain why these are strategies that managers might use in overcoming employee resistance and why they should be regarded as poor strategies. Okay, my explanation to you on this is the management might, and the first part is this, is they actually impose this on its people, as against the other forms of change where we actually have the change process driven by the people within the organisation. So management imposes this on the people, and straight away what it implies that the employees may not be willing to adopt those changes wanted by management, because there's actually no investment being made by those employees in championing the cause that management requires. Okay, the best strategies of change are those which the employees will champion, and they will rapidly be developed because it brings positive results of how those employees can better perform their work and their duties. Okay, so that's the first part. I'll then explain coercion a little bit further. Coercion, by its namesake, is a threat, and it implies that if you don't do what is asked, then the impact on you will be this, this, and this. So it's like a threat, and the employees will act in one of two ways under that action. They'll become stubborn, and they won't do what is asked, and will most probably bring union action to the process, or they will begrudgingly enact the requirements that's been asked of them by management, but they will become unresponsive in making those improvements within the organisation, which will result in poor future productivity outcomes and a loss of respect for the organisational management, and it will result in a loss of morale with the people because they're not happy with it. Okay, so if you're at the stage in an organisation you want changes, you've got to coerce, and you've got to put some cooptation strategies in place and manipulate the workspace. Be prepared for the employee result with it. Okay, there's much better ways of doing it. However, part of the coercion may be because of a time constraint. But if you're going to ask the people to pull together because of that time constraint, make sure that you give them a promise or an expectation that after this is all over, that they're going to get some positives by doing that work for you. All right, so that's the primary reason for it. If you've got the majority of the intent of what I've written there, you're going to get all of the marks or the majority of the marks. Okay. Question 4. Explain us what meant by specific environment factors. This is about the only question that was a definitional question here. So the specific environment factors was taken from week 2 on page 5. Those external forces that have a direct influence on the manager's decisions and actions and are directly relevant to the achievement of the organisation's goals. So if you got that, you got your 2 marks. Okay, it said provide 3 examples. I've put half a dozen examples here about how pressure groups might create hardship for a project manager building a wharf on Sydney Harbour. And thinking this through, the first one is being able to demonstrate that the organisation's previous project work has been substandard or environmentally irresponsible. So you might have a pressure group that is looking after the environment. They've looked at this organisation, said they don't do their work good. Here's a really bad track record. We're going to create hardship with them through the news reporting and the like for that. And the organisation's got to defend its position, and clearly the focus comes off its work at that point while they're defending their position. Even if the claims aren't justified, they've still got to do it. Okay, second example that I gave is providing unsubstantiated claims to the media. This is by the pressure group, that the project manager has to defend that claim and therefore consume time and expense to the project manager and their team, and that will impact on the project completion time. Okay, if the project completion time runs over, we're going to have an issue in contract of what that's going to cost the organisation at that point. Okay. Third point is the pressure group may use the media to highlight the construction operation will cause damage to the environment. Okay, and they've seen that in real time happening on the site, or they may have seen it through the construction operations being used by the organisation in previous work. Okay. Fourth reason might be by using the media to highlight that construction operations will cause damage to the animal habitat, okay, on the harbour and its foreshores. Okay, they may choose to stack shareholder meetings and raise issues and doubts in the company's operations to cause confusion to investors. So one of the ways that may come about is if there is a shareholder meeting for this organisation, stack that meeting, create confusion for the shareholders, and it may mean that capital is moved out of that organisation, which will impact its future operations and the ability to borrow what they can construct. Last reason I put up is create confusion that will impact on the government of the day by providing unsubstantiated reasons that will impact current transport operations, which will be picked up by the media and cause the government to react and influence the project manager's operational plan. So because this was a wharf, okay, if the protest organisation is saying to the government of the day that there's going to be problems with the functional operations of existing transport in and around this locality, the government of the day may be caused to interact with this project manager's operational plan. Okay, so I'm sure that many of you will have some of those reasons, so you should get your 3 marks for those questions if you've got anything like that. If there's other elements which I consider good exemplars, you'll get marks for those too. Question 5, okay, was about appointing a laissez-faire leadership style manager for the project, and you can use examples. I've done a general description here, and I'll take your exemplars as you present them to me. A project manager can have any leadership style. The problem with a laissez-faire leader is that they have to ensure that they have the right operational controls in place so that any subordinate leaders that they've delegated tasks to perform have specific requirements to meet in the project's outputs. Okay, so by definition, a laissez-faire leader will delegate a lot of authority to others, but they can't delegate their responsibilities, only the tasks to be completed. If it's unchecked, then the job schedule will suffer, the quality will suffer, and the cost will blow out, and the scope of the project will unlikely to be able to be maintained without rework required. Okay, so that's my explanation of it. If you've got writings that parallel with that or address many of those points that I've given you there, that you actually understand what a laissez-faire leadership is, you'll get the majority of your marks or all of the marks. Question 6, from a project manager's perspective, why is it necessary to clearly distinguish between a client's needs and wants in the development of contract detail? We covered this last week. In the setting up of the contract, the project manager requires payment for the work performed. Therefore, in meeting the client's exact needs, the contract needs to reflect this detail. In most contracts, variations occur, and this is reflective of the embellishment of the basic client needs by using more updated methods to achieve those needs, or it could be that the client has changed their mind, so their original need has been in part superseded. Okay, so remembering that the client is making the change here because of their wants. So if the client wants to change the contract, then each variation must be recognised individually, and each has a separate price. Okay, so that needs to be documented. And the key consideration for the contract to be functional is that the basic needs have to be fully serviced before the additional changes are implemented, so that the contract completion can be achieved. So for the contractor's perspective, they've got to make sure that the client has actually got enough funding to do those additional changes. Okay, and that would be the question that they would ask the client. Okay, question 7. I've said provide an explanation of how sustainability might be defined for each of the different infrastructure projects. Okay, and in your answer, detail a uniquely sustainable outcome for the project type. I have chosen to do this by exemplars or examples. Okay, so in the resurfacing of an asphalt roadway, we could recycle some of the old asphalt and reuse that. If you've given an explanation but you haven't given a specific example that separates it from all of the other BCDE, you'll get a half mark for that. But if you've given a good example that's unique about that detail, that's fine. I mentioned in hospitals that they're actually constructed using a cellular structure, so we don't pull the basic hospital structure down, but we can refit and refurbish without demolishing the whole structure as technology changes and as the needs and the locality of that hospital changes as well. Okay, so that's one of the ways that we can have a sustainable hospital. The basic structure of the hospital doesn't change, but its fit out does with time through a cellular structure. Okay, installing a new water supply pipeline. Okay, we use standard designs, interchangeable parts and fitments as we complete that. In one of the questions, in one of the solutions that one of the students had put up for that, they said maybe putting down in a new subdivision planning for the expansion of that supply pipeline in the future, so we haven't got to uproot the ground again. All we've got to do is connect to pipes and fitments already located. Good answer. Okay, so that was different to mine, but still a good answer. Okay, replacing sleepers and railway lines in maintaining an existing railway. Okay, design the operation that the existing railway belts can be left in place. Use materials that are local to the area, so it could be timber sleepers in a locality. Likewise, it could be concrete sleepers. Okay, have standard designs and rail lengths and ensure that the installation, that the expansion rates of the rail lines can be accommodated for the thermal change in the locality to avoid later rail buckling. So there's design issues that go in there and construction issues that have got to be taken into consideration. And then I've got here locally available materials, okay, that be used for that. Last one is the erection of a telecommunications tower. Okay, the ordering of prefabricated towers so as to eliminate site waste generation. Nominating the correct equipment needed to erect the same will bring down the construction efficiency, which will maximise profit as a sustainable outcome for the company's longevity. Okay, and you may well find that you have a contractor, because they address all of these things, they're a preferred contractor, and they can erect these telecommunications towers very quickly and efficiently. And so we get a good sustainable operation for the contractor, and we get rapid implementation of new communication towers. So that's part of that process. All right, that led on to part B, which is the 10-mark question. You'll see here I've not put a lot of detail to this because I'm expecting I'm going to get quite a variety of explanations by you guys. But I've said here the primary reason why the project director might want to structure the project using work groups in preference to work teams is that because with their experience they have the capacity to lead the work groups themselves, or because they know what is wanted, they have appointed other well-experienced line managers to lead the project. So under that scenario, the project will run very efficiently because the experiences on the ground with these people that have built an existing highway before, they know how to expand and extend the lanes. And as such, when this project runs, we're going to have a lot of junior appointees to that project being trained through that project duration of how that work is done. Okay, so the point being, it's about the experience of the project director and who they might select for that project, which would influence of whether they use work groups or work teams, because experienced people who have done this work before have been selected. It's much better to set it up as task teams and work groups. As task groups, and the work group manager leads that bunch of people and effectively trains them and does all the checking themselves to make sure it runs very well. What you'll get is a very efficient program, but you've got a really good training program as well that runs with that. Okay, so we're not trying to scope the project with the input from everybody for their information. We're actually directly explaining what's got to be done, and in that way we are training those people very efficiently. At the end of the project, from what I've said tonight, it would be quite reasonable that the estimating team and the construction planners doing that work would revisit the project, and they would get the lessons learnt out of that and the key learnings, and that would greatly bolster the road production estimates and the methods of going about doing that work for the future. So that's where we stand. I will now just get to the chat session to see what else has come up. Okay, it's only the detail on effectiveness, which I have answered. And I'm out of answers, guys, so I'm expecting that from what I've marked so far that you're going to perform quite well in this test. And if anybody hasn't performed well in the test, I will speak to you separately about that performance and maintain you on track. Okay, as I said, I have one student that hasn't done the test, so I thank you all for doing that test Saturday. There's a couple of you that had uploading problems. That's because you probably didn't do the exemplar about how to PDF your work and upload those. I was quite happy with the people that did send me the PDFs. Yes, they arrived a couple of minutes late, but I know that that was the time being spent in uploading, not in doing answers. So I will give you fair consideration on that. There's a few of you that have asked me questions about uploading what I've got. Some I've responded back to, others that I didn't need to respond back to, I haven't at this stage. So I've just continued on with the marking, and I want to get that out of the road quite quickly. All right, I'm going to finish up at this stage. Unless there's any other questions from you guys, a bit of an early mark tonight. I wish you well with your other courses and study this week. Do get in with your reflective journal. If you haven't started that already, you need to actually make a good start on that. Take the advice that I've given, and anybody that's got questions, I'll answer those on the Moodle online. As you will see online with one of the students, I had sent an apology. I had responded poorly to them because I missed the line of communication, and I'd actually responded to them earlier, and so we'll move on from that. Okay, that's about it, guys. We'll continue from there. Okay, have a great evening. Bye now. Okay, so I'll stop sharing. Okay, I'll stop the recording.